Stepmother. The word was a blade slicing through the crackle of the fireplace. Countess Vivian flinched violently, her spine snapping ramrod straight. She whirled around, her hand still holding a charred strip of my father's will over the flames. Her perfectly composed face, a mask of gentle mourning she had worn for the past week, shattered into 1,000 pieces of pure shock. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a sallow, waxy pallor. She was caught. Caught in the single most destructive act of her life, the one that, in another timeline, had guaranteed her victory and my ruin. She stared at me, her mouth agape, her mind scrambling to understand how I could be standing there, watching her, when I should have been locked in my chambers, drowning in a sea of grief. She saw a 17-year-old girl in a black mourning dress, but her instincts screamed that she was facing something else entirely. The acrid smoke of burning parchment, the scent of my own annihilation, filled the air. This was the moment. 12 years ago, or a lifetime ago, depending on one's perspective, I had collapsed in this very doorway, a helpless child watching my future turn to ash. That girl's grief had been Vivian's greatest weapon. With the true will destroyed, her forgeries would place the entire Ravenscroft duchy, its titles, lands, and fortunes, squarely in her grasp. She would become the regent of my inheritance, bleeding it dry to fund her ambitions while painting me as an unstable, vindictive brat. Her lies would eventually become so audacious, her embezzlement so vast, that she would need a scapegoat to offer the crown. That scapegoat, I remembered with chilling clarity, had been me. But the girl she had sent to the executioner's block was gone, replaced by the woman who had knelt there. My fingers, resting calmly on the doorframe, were perfectly still. There was no trembling, no fear, only the icy calm of absolute certainty. As I held Vivian's terrified gaze, the scene before me flickered. For a heartbeat, the ornate fireplace became a crude wooden block. The warm glow of the fire became the cold glint of a headsman's axe, and the ticking grandfather clock in the hall became the murmuring of a bloodthirsty crowd. The phantom chill of steel on my neck was a ghostly reminder of the price of failure. This second chance was not a gift. It was a weapon. I had been forged in the fires of Vivian's betrayal and sharpened on the whetstone of her ultimate justice. I had returned not to grieve, but to collect. The past was my map, and the future was my prey. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the royal inspector was already on his way from the capital. A meticulous, by-the-book bureaucrat, he was scheduled to arrive at dawn to examine the succession documents and legitimize the transfer of title. I glanced at the clock in the hall, its heavy brass pendulum swinging like a metronome, counting down to my victory or my final death. It was noon. That gave me 18 hours. 18 hours to dismantle the web of lies Vivian had spent months weaving. 18 hours to produce the evidence she believed had been destroyed forever. In my last life, I hadn't even known there was a battle to be fought. In this one, I had already won the war. All that remained was the final, satisfying slaughter. I took a deliberate step into the room, my slippers making no sound on the thick Aubusson rug. I didn't look at the fire or the remnants of my father's legacy turning to smoke. I looked only at her. "You seem to be misplacing things, stepmother," I said, my voice laced with a predatory calm that made her recoil. I walked past her, trailing my fingers along the edge of a mahogany table, my eyes scanning the room as if reacquainting myself with my own home. "Don't worry, I remember where everything is." A slow smile spread across my face, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It was a hunter's smile, and in that moment, Vivian's face crumbled. She finally understood. She wasn't looking at the ghost of the girl she had wronged, but the architect of her coming ruin. Vivian remained frozen for a long moment, a statue of aristocratic outrage carved from ice. The cogs were turning behind her eyes, cycling rapidly through denial, fury, and a flicker of something close to primal fear. "What is the meaning of this?" she finally managed, her voice a low hiss. She took a step forward, attempting to reclaim her authority. "You will return to your room. Your grief is making you delusional." I ignored her, my gaze fixed on my father's desk. It was a monstrous piece of dark mahogany, a fortress of secrets where he had managed the affairs of the duchy. She thought it was impenetrable, its master lock a final guarantee of her security. But she didn't know that father and I had shared secrets of our own. I strode past her, the whisper of my morning gown the only sound in the tense silence. My fingers traced the carved griffin on the desk's right leg until they found the tiny, almost invisible notch I had helped carve as a child. I pressed it, and a small, hidden drawer no larger than a matchbox sprang open. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, ornate silver key. Vivian's breath hitched. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. "That desk has been locked since your father's death." "He gave it to me when I was 10, I said, my voice conversational as I fitted the key into the main lock. "He told me that a good ruler always has a contingency plan, a way to access the truth when others would see it buried." The lock turned with a well-oiled, satisfying click. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot, a declaration that the old locks no longer held. I lifted the heavy lid, revealing the neatly organized stacks of parchment within. Vivian had assumed the most incriminating documents were the ones she had just burned, but my father was far more cunning than that. The will was a public-facing document. The real truth of his affairs, and hers, was kept here. My hands moved with unerring purpose, pushing aside land deeds and trade agreements until I found what I was looking for. A slim, leather-bound folio tied with a simple black ribbon. It was father's private ledger, the one he had laughingly called his Book of Truths. I pulled it from the desk, along with a sheaf of attached correspondence, and turned to face her. I held the folio up for her to see, letting the moment stretch. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the ledger like it was a venomous snake. "You little viper," she whispered, her facade of control crumbling into raw fury. "Rummaging through your dead father's private things. Have you no shame, no decency?" "The shame in this room isn't mine to bear," I replied, placing the folio on the polished surface of the table between us. I untied the ribbon and opened the cover. "Hello, stepmother. Shall we discuss your creative accounting with the Crown's taxes?" "Those papers are private family matters, Alara," she snapped, snatching at the excuse like a drowning woman lunging for a piece of driftwood. She tried to inject a note of command into her voice, the imperious tone of the Countess she so desperately wanted to be. "They are of no concern to you or anyone else. You are playing with fire." "Oh, I agree," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "But the fire isn't in my hands. It's in yours." Her hand flew to her throat as I began to spread the evidence across the mahogany surface. I didn't just show her the ledger, I laid out a story of treason in ink and parchment. "You see, private family matters don't typically involve embezzling tax revenue owed to the Prince Regent." I slid a piece of vellum toward her. "Here is the royal charter granting tax relief for the Western tenants, citing flood damage. A noble gesture." Then I placed a second document beside it. "And here is your private correspondence with the tax collector, agreeing to split the saved funds between you, with his silence bought for a handsome price. The seals are quite authentic, wouldn't you agree?" Her face had gone from white to a mottled gray. "And this," I continued, producing a receipt bearing the royal seal, "is the payment you claimed from the treasury to supply our soldiers on the northern border. A patriot's duty." I followed it with letters from the garrison commander, pleading with my father for overdue supplies that never arrived. "The men went hungry for a month, stepmother. Did their share of the gold keep you warm that winter?" She stared at the papers, her eyes darting from one damning seal to the next, from one line of her own handwriting to another. Real receipts, authentic seals, genuine correspondence she must have believed was lost in 100 different files, or, better yet, burned. She saw the land grant you claimed for war widows, followed by the deed of sale to one of her distant cousins. She saw the requests for funds to repair the castle's outer wall, and the jeweler's bills for necklaces and earrings that matched the missing amounts down to the last copper. It was all there, a meticulous, undeniable map of her greed. "These are forgeries," she choked out, the words devoid of conviction. "Lies! You always were a hateful, vindictive child." "Was I?" I tilted my head. "Or was I just watching you, learning from your example?" I let her stew in her panic, Let the weight of the evidence crush her. The silence in the room grew thick and heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the frantic rhythm of her breathing. We stood there for hours, a silent tableau of accuser and accused, as the afternoon sun bled into a crimson sunset and the shadows grew long and menacing. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply stared at the proof of her ruin. Just as the last of the light faded from the sky, the grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. It struck the 11th hour. The deep, resonant tones seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. I glanced toward the sound, then back at her. 11 o'clock, I said softly. Time is passing. A new, sharper terror entered her eyes. The inspector was coming at dawn, but I had a more pressing deadline in mind. Lord Chancellor Aldrich is a man of routine. He expects his morning briefing at 8 sharp. I paused, letting the name hang in the air between us, a name far more powerful than a mere inspector's. That gives us precisely 9 hours to decide what version of this story he's going to hear. From the frigid shadows of the castle's moonlit courtyard, I watched the last glimmer of Vivian's carriage lanterns disappear over the western ridge. I lowered the heavy brass spyglass, a faint smile touching my lips. She had fled exactly as I knew she would. After our confrontation in the study, I had simply walked away, leaving her surrounded by the evidence of her crimes. I left the door open and the path to her stables clear. A cornered animal will either fight or flee, and Vivian, for all her bluster, was a coward at her core. Her only hope was to outrun the truth, to reach the capital and shore up her lies before I could present my case to a higher authority. The crunch of boots on frozen gravel behind me announced the arrival of my ally. Marcus materialized from the darkness, his breath misting in the icy air, his expression grim. "Right on schedule," I murmured, my voice low. "She took the bait precisely as you predicted, my lady." Panic is a predictable motivator, Marcus. It makes even the most cunning people follow a straight line. I handed him the spyglass. "What news from your contacts in the city?" "Worse than we feared," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "She's not just running. She's mobilizing her network of corrupt clerks to alter the royal registries before morning. Her agents were dispatched hours ago, carrying fresh copies of her forgeries and heavy purses of gold. They're targeting the Hall of Lineage and the Royal Scriptorium. She intends to replace the authentic documents on file with her own versions, creating a history that backs her claim to the will. So she plans to fight forgery with more forgery," I mused, a cold knot of satisfaction tightening in my chest. This was the move of a desperate gambler, pushing all her chips onto a losing hand. A bold strategy. It confirms she believes all of Father's original papers were in that desk. She has no idea what I truly hold. "It's the scale of it that worries me," Marcus pressed, his loyalty warring with his unease. "She has people who owe her favors buried deep within the bureaucracy. Men who can make a false document look like it has been sitting in an archive for 20 years. If they succeed, by the time Lord Chancellor Aldrich examines the records, they will appear to support her claim entirely. It will be your word against the Crown's own official history." I pulled my cloak tighter against the biting wind. "Her network is built on greed, Marcus. That makes it brittle. Let her try. Let her bribe every clerk from here to the sea. It will only make her fall that much more spectacular." My confidence seemed to unsettle him more than it reassured him. He hesitated, clearly wrestling with another piece of information, something he was reluctant to share. "What is it?" I prompted gently. "There's more, isn't there?" He finally met my gaze, his own full of grim certainty. "My lady, the forged marriage certificate, she's had it authenticated by 3 different parishes." He let the words sink in, a revelation of breathtaking audacity. It wasn't just about the will or the finances anymore. Vivian was attempting to rewrite the very foundation of my existence. 1 in the capital, 2 in the southern shires, where her family holds influence. Each has provided a certified copy, complete with the parish priest's seal and signature, attesting that she and your father were married a month after your mother's passing. It's the cornerstone of her entire claim. With it, she is the rightful Countess Ravenscroft, and her version of the will is unassailable. I felt a flicker of something that was almost admiration for her sheer nerve. To bribe not one but three separate men of the cloth was a masterstroke of villainy. It was also, I knew, a fatal miscalculation. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Then she's more desperate than I thought, Marcus," I said, my voice resonating with a certainty that finally cut through his anxiety. He stared at me, bewildered by my calm. "My lady, how can you say that? 3 parishes lending their name to her lie gives her an incredible advantage. It builds a wall of legitimacy around her." "No," I corrected him. "It builds a cage. A subtle forgery, a single clever lie can be difficult to unspool. But 3? 3 identical forgeries, all procured in a panic, all bearing the marks of fresh ink and hurried bribes? She's overplaying her hand. She believes she is creating an unimpeachable truth, but what she's actually creating is a pattern, a conspiracy. And conspiracies are much easier to expose than isolated lies. She's linked 3 corrupt priests directly to her cause. When one falls, they will all fall." Marcus considered my words, his expression slowly shifting from worry to a dawning understanding. He saw the logic, the cold, predatory intelligence behind my thinking. "But if the crown believes her version," he began, the last vestiges of doubt clinging to his voice. "If Lord Aldrich sees 3 authenticated certificates, he may not look any further." "They won't," I said, the words as solid and unyielding as the frozen earth beneath my feet. "Not after tomorrow." I turned my gaze back toward the distant ridge where Vivian's carriage had disappeared. She was racing toward the capital, toward what she believed was her salvation, a fortress of lies built by corrupt clerks and cowardly priests. She thought she was laying a trap for me. In reality, she was walking into mine. The winter wind cut through my cloak, a razor-sharp chill that promised a bitter dawn. But my resolve burned hotter than the braziers lighting her path. Every move she made, every lie she told was simply another stone she was laying for her own tomb. She was fighting a war against the past, armed with brittle forgeries and fleeting alliances. I had the truth, and the truth I was beginning to understand was the most patient and ruthless weapon of all. Tomorrow, Lord Chancellor Aldrich would see the evidence. And tomorrow, Vivian's meticulously crafted world would come to an end. The office of the Lord Chancellor of the realm was a place designed to make one feel small. The walls were lined with towering shelves of legal tomes, each book a testament to centuries of unbending law. The air itself seemed heavy, thick with the scent of old paper, beeswax, and quiet, absolute power. At the head of a vast, unadorned oak table sat Lord Chancellor Aldrich, a man who looked as though he had been hewn from the same ancient, unyielding timber as his desk. His face was a roadmap of stern judgments and sleepless nights, his eyes gray and penetrating, missing nothing. He had listened to both of our petitions for an audience, Vivian's, a frantic demand for protection from delusional stepdaughter, and mine, a calm, measured request to present evidence of treason within a noble house. Intrigued by the conflict, he had summoned us both at dawn. Vivian sat to my left, a vision of wronged dignity and expensive black silk. Her all-night ride to the capital had left faint shadows under her eyes, but she had marshaled her considerable skills to present a facade of calm resolve. Her documents were laid out before the Chancellor, her forged copy of my father's will, and, beside it, the 3 authenticated marriage certificates from her network of corrupt priests. She had made her case first, her voice ringing with feigned sincerity as she spoke of my lashing out in grief, of my fanciful and dangerous accusations. I remained silent through it all, waiting, watching the Chancellor. And the Chancellor was watching the papers. He picked up the first marriage certificate, his fingers surprisingly delicate for such a large man. He held it to the morning light that streamed through the tall arched window, his gaze narrowed to a sliver of scrutiny. "The parish of Oakhaven," Aldrich stated, his voice a low baritone that filled the room. "An old and respected parish. The priest, Father Michael, has served there for 30 years. He looked at Vivian. "He vouches for the authenticity of this document?" "He does, my Lord Chancellor," Vivian said, her voice smooth as cream. "He was a dear friend to my late husband. He was heartbroken to hear of these slanderous accusations being leveled against me. Aldrich said nothing. He laid the certificate down and picked up the second, then the third, comparing them side by side. His silence was more unnerving than any cross-examination. He rubbed the wax of one of the seals with his thumb, his expression unreadable. "The ink is remarkably uniform across all three documents," he observed, his gaze still fixed on the parchments. "And the seals, they are perfect, almost too perfect, as if pressed yesterday by the same steady hand, rather than months apart by three different men in three different parishes." Vivian's composure flickered. A single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. I wouldn't know about such things, my lord. I am merely the grateful recipient of their diligence in preserving the truth of my union." "Indeed," Aldrich murmured. He pushed her documents to the side with a dismissive air. The gesture was small, but it felt like a tectonic shift in the room. He turned his gray eyes to me for the first time. "Miss Ravenscroft, your stepmother accuses you of delusion and malice. You, in turn, accuse her of treason. The latter is a far more serious charge and one I do not entertain lightly. You claim to have evidence." My heart beat a steady, triumphant rhythm. This was the moment. "I do, my lord," I said, my voice clear and even. I untied the ribbon on my own folio and began to lay out the contents, not with Vivian's defensive flourish, but with the simple clarity of fact. The private ledgers, the intercepted correspondence, the forged requisitions for crown funds. I walked him through it, item by item, my voice a calm counterpoint to the damning story the papers told. I showed him the tax revenues that had vanished between the duchy and the capital, and the letters from the tax collector confirming his illicit arrangement with Vivian. I showed him the pleas for supplies from the northern garrison, laid beside the receipts for jewels Vivian had purchased in the same week. Unlike her documents, these were a messy collection of truths. The ink was faded in places, the seals were chipped, the parchments creased and worn with time. They were real. Aldrich examined each one with the same meticulous attention he had given Vivian's, but his reaction was different. There was no suspicion in his eyes now, only a grim, gathering thunder. He cross-referenced a date from a letter with an entry in the ledger, his finger tracing a path of corruption that was undeniable. He held one of my father's authentic signatures up to the light, then glanced at the spidery, hesitant signature on Vivian's forged will. He grunted, a sound of profound disapproval. "The evidence you present is compelling," he said, steepling his fingers. He looked at Vivian, and for the first time, his gaze was openly hostile. "Countess, this ledger appears to detail a systematic embezzlement of crown taxes and treasury funds over a period of 2 years. These letters suggest you knowingly deprived soldiers of the realm of vital supplies for personal profit. How do you answer this?" Vivian was white as a sheet. "Lies, fabrications," she stammered, her voice cracking. "She has spent her entire life in that castle, surrounded by her father's papers. She could have forged any of this. She is a vindictive, hateful girl, twisted by grief and jealousy." "Am I?" I interjected softly. "Then explain this, stepmother." I laid one final document on the table. It was a simple note, written in my father's strong, familiar hand. "Vivian, the Crown is asking questions about the northern requisitions. We must discuss. Burn this." His signet ring left an impression on the table beneath the note. I explained to Aldrich. "You can see the traces of wax. She clearly failed to follow his final instruction." That was the final blow. The note, in my father's own hand, confirmed he knew of her schemes. It tied them together. Vivian stared at it, her mouth opening and closing silently. No lies or excuses left to offer. The game was over. Aldrich's face was set like stone. The full weight of the law was about to fall upon her. I could already see the future unfolding. The arrest, the trial, the public disgrace. By noon tomorrow, she'll be stripped of everything she stole from my family's name. Our honor would be restored, and her name would be a curse. The relief was so profound, so intoxicating, it almost made the last 12 years of suffering worthwhile. But I underestimated her. I had accounted for her greed, her corruption, her cowardice. I had not accounted for the sheer venomous spite of a creature with nothing left to lose. Just as Aldrich opened his mouth to deliver his judgment, Vivian lunged forward, her hands slamming down on the table. Her eyes were wild, her carefully crafted mask shattered, revealing the raw, ugly desperation beneath. "You cannot listen to her," she shrieked, her voice a raw, ragged thing. "None of it matters. The ledgers, the will, none of it. Her evidence is meaningless." Aldrich raised a stern eyebrow. "And why is that, Countess? You have yet to offer a single piece of credible evidence to refute these charges." Vivian took a deep, shuddering breath and played her final, devastating card. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes burning with a hateful fire. "Because she has no claim," she screamed, the words echoing in the silent, hallowed office. "The documents are irrelevant because she is irrelevant. She has no right to the Ravenscroft name, no right to the inheritance, and no right to stand in this room and accuse me of anything." She paused, letting the silence hang before delivering the killing blow. "The girl is a bastard. She is not my husband's true heir at all." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the strength from my limbs. The entire room seemed to tilt on its axis. Illegitimate. A bastard. Of all the moves, all the wicked possibilities I had planned for, this was the one I had never conceived. It was a brilliant, horrific gambit. It sidestepped the mountain of evidence against her and struck at the very core of my identity. It didn't matter if she was a thief if I had no right to the property she had stolen. I looked at Lord Chancellor Aldrich. The anger on his face had been replaced by something far worse, a deep, troubled frown. The charge of treason was a matter of state, but the sanctity of a noble bloodline was a matter of sacred law. He had to investigate the claim. In that single venomous sentence, Vivian had snatched my victory away, plunging me into a crisis far deeper and more dangerous than any I had imagined. My perfect plan was in ruins. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and venomous. Bastard. For a single terrifying moment, the world tilted and the floor fell away from beneath my feet. I stared at Vivian, at the triumphant, hateful glare in her eyes, and felt a tremor of pure shock. This was the one attack I hadn't foreseen. In all my meticulous planning, in all the scenarios I had played out in my mind, I had focused on her crimes of greed and forgery. I had never once thought to defend the very essence of my identity. My bloodline was a fact, as certain as the sun's rising. To hear it questioned, to have my connection to my own father severed with a single malicious lie left me speechless. I saw the shift in Lord Chancellor Aldrich's expression. The stern judgment of a lawkeeper was replaced by the deep, troubled concern of a guardian of the peerage. The fate of a duchy rested on blood, and Vivian's accusation, however vile, had to be addressed. She had changed the battlefield from a criminal court to a court of lineage, and on this new ground, all my evidence of her financial crimes was suddenly moot. "My Lord Chancellor," Vivian pressed, seizing the advantage, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "You see? The girl is an imposter. She has no standing. Her claims are nothing more than a desperate attempt by a base-born child to seize a title that is not hers. She should be removed from your presence." Aldrich looked at me, his gray eyes searching my face. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said, his tone grave. "This is a most serious allegation. The line of succession is paramount. Can you offer proof of your legitimacy?" My shock receded, replaced by a slow-burning, clarifying rage. Vivian thought she had played her trump card. She thought she had found the one weakness in my armor. In her desperation, however, she had blundered into the one trap I hadn't even realized I had set. She had attacked my mother. I took a slow breath, my frantic heartbeat steadying into a calm, lethal rhythm. I met Aldrich's gaze, and then I turned to look at my stepmother, letting her savor her fleeting victory for one last moment before I brought her world crashing down. I reached into the folio of papers on the table before me, past the ledgers and letters, and drew out a single, folded piece of parchment I had brought on instinct alone. It was old, the creases worn soft as cloth, the ink faded to a gentle brown. It was not a weapon I had intended to use, but a memento I could not bear to leave behind. I unfolded it and laid it gently on the polished oak table. My mother's things were stored in the attic after her death, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the suddenly silent room. Vivian declared them to be painful reminders for my father. In truth, she simply wanted to erase any trace of the woman who came before her. I smoothed the document flat. She was thorough. She burned my mother's portraits, gave away her gowns, sold her furniture. But she overlooked a small cedar jewelry box. Inside, beneath a false bottom, my mother kept this. It was a marriage certificate, not a forgery procured by bribery and fear, but the real one, dated 20 years ago, signed in the capital's grand cathedral. The signature of my father, bold and assured, was beside that of my mother, elegant and clear. It was witnessed and sealed by the previous Lord Chancellor himself. This was not just a document, it was a piece of history. Lord Chancellor Aldrich leaned forward, his eyes widening as he recognized the seal and signature of his predecessor. He picked up the parchment with a reverence he had not afforded any other document that day. He examined it for a long moment before looking at Vivian, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Countess," he said, his voice laced with a dry, cutting irony, "your stepdaughter seems remarkably well prepared." "She's lying, your lordship. That girl has always been vindictive," Vivian insisted, her voice rising with a frantic edge. The color was draining from her face again. "That is another of her forgeries. She is obsessed. She spent years plotting this, creating these documents to ruin me. It means nothing." "On the contrary," Aldrich said, his voice turning to steel, "it means everything." He took her prize certificate, the one from Oakhaven, and laid it directly beside the one I had produced. "You claim this certificate bearing your name is genuine, and you claim this one," he tapped my mother's, "is a forgery." He looked directly at her, his eyes cold and hard as granite. "Then explain why your husband's signature changes style between documents." He pointed a thick finger at the papers. "On this certificate, his own marriage to his first wife. His signature is strong, confident, the letters perfectly formed. Yet on yours, signed supposedly only a few years later, it is thin, wavering, uncertain. Almost as if it were drawn by someone copying a signature they were not familiar with." The trap had sprung. The silence in the room was absolute. Vivian stared at the two signatures, her mind racing for an escape that did not exist. The evidence was irrefutable. One was the mark of a living, breathing man. The other was a ghost, a pale imitation. She stammered, her gaze darting around the room as if seeking an escape route. He was ill when he signed the later papers." The excuse was so weak, so pathetic, it was worse than an admission of guilt. It was an insult to the intelligence of everyone present. Lord Aldrich leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of utter contempt. He had his verdict. The case was closed. Vivian had not only been proven a thief and an embezzler, but now a perjurer and a truly incompetent forger. She had lost, completely and irrevocably. But the universe, it seemed, had one more surprise in store. Before Aldrich could speak the words that would condemn Vivian forever, the heavy oak door to his office swung open. An aide, a young man with a pale face and panicked eyes, hurried inside, bowing hastily. "My Lord Chancellor, forgive the intrusion," he said, breathless. "A matter of state has arisen." Aldrich looked up, his expression severe. "I am in the middle of a hearing, Connell. It had better be important." "It is, my lord," the aide insisted, wringing his hands. "It's the Prince Regent. He was on his way to the state dinner preparations when he was met by the Countess's people. They filled his ears with a story of treason, disputed succession, and a bastard heir threatening the stability of the Ravenscroft Duchy." The aide swallowed hard. "He is displeased. He demands answers." Vivian's head snapped up, a wild, desperate hope igniting in her eyes. She had lost the battle with Aldrich, but she might yet win the war. "He is coming here," Aldrich asked, a new urgency in his voice. The aide nodded, his eyes wide. "He is not coming, my lord. He is here." As if on cue, the sound of the royal guard's heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed from the stone corridor outside. "The Prince Regent arrives within the hour, demanding answers before the evening's state dinner. He intends to resolve this matter himself. Publicly." The Prince Regent was not a man who appreciated having his schedule disturbed, particularly not on the evening of a state dinner. He had swept into Lord Chancellor Aldrich's office like a gathering storm, his procession of royal guards parting the castle staff before him. He listened, his handsome face a mask of regal impatience, as Aldrich gave him a terse, brutal summary of the situation. Two competing claims to a duchy, one backed by a mountain of incriminating evidence, the other by a desperate last-minute accusation of bastardy. The Prince Regent's dark eyes had flickered between Vivian and me, and a decision was made. This would not be settled in the quiet confines of an office. This was a spectacle, a challenge to the stability of the peerage itself, and it would be dealt with in the open. He declared the matter would be resolved immediately here in the great hall where the nobility of the realm were already gathering. And so I found myself standing in the center of the vast tapestried hall, the low murmur of the court falling to a stunned, absolute silence. The Prince Regent sat upon a hastily requisitioned gilded chair, a makeshift throne, with Lord Aldrich standing grimly at his side. Vivian stood opposite me, her face pale but her back ramrod straight, preparing for one final performance. The curious, hungry eyes of 50 lords and ladies were fixed upon us. This was her final gambit, to turn this into a chaotic public trial where she could play the victim. But I would not allow it. Before she could speak, I began to lay out the documents on a long table brought forth by the guards. Not just the ledger or my mother's true marriage certificate, but everything. One by one, I presented the damning papers, the forged land grants, the false pension claims, the letters confirming bribes. The great hall fell silent as I laid 23 forged documents before the assembled nobility, each one a testament to my stepmother's boundless greed. You stand accused, Countess, of attempting to defraud the crown and subvert the succession of a noble house, the Prince Regent said, his voice ringing with authority. And you, Miss Ravenscroft, are accused of being an impostor with no claim to the name you bear. The floor is yours, Countess. Justify your actions. Vivian seized the opening. Your Highness, my lords, my ladies, she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. I stand here, a grieving widow, attacked by a girl I raised as my own flesh and blood. But before she could continue her soliloquy, I cut her off, my own voice sharp and clear. You destroyed my inheritance, stepmother, but you forgot about mother's private correspondence. I held up a packet of letters tied in my mother's favorite blue ribbon. Letters in which my father speaks of his boundless love for his true wife and heir. Letters you failed to burn along with her portraits. Did you think erasing her image would erase her existence? This is preposterous. I raised this ungrateful child, Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking as she appealed to the gallery of nobles. She clasped her hands to her chest, a perfect portrait of a wounded matriarch. I gave her a home. I clothed her, fed her, endured her moods and her malice after her dear father passed. And this is how she repays me. With lies? With vile, twisted forgeries designed to ruin the woman who loved her? You raised me to be silent while you embezzled crown funds, I retorted, stepping forward. The fire in my veins burned away any last trace of fear. I was no longer a girl in a morning gown. I was the spirit of my father's house demanding justice. You taught me that a daughter's place was to be seen and not heard. You praised my quiet obedience while you were selling off our family's lands to fund your lifestyle. You lauded my meekness as you stole the pensions meant for the men who bled for this kingdom. You didn't raise a daughter. You cultivated a witness you thought you could control. The crowd murmured, the tide of their sympathy visibly shifting. Vivian's face, a mask of maternal grief only moments before, began to harden into something ugly. How dare you accuse me of— Accuse you? I interrupted, my voice ringing with cold fury as I began to point to the documents laid out on the table, one by one. I accuse you of nothing. I present the facts. The missing tax revenue from the western lands, which you funneled into a private account in the free cities. Shall I show them the ledger? The altered land grants for the southern territories, signed with a forgery of my father's weakening signature. Shall I pass around the documents so they can see the tremor in the ink? The fictional war widow pensions you invented, complete with the names of women who never existed, whose monthly stipends went directly to your dressmaker and your jeweler. Shall I continue? Each charge landed like a physical blow. Vivian staggered back, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with panic. The performance was over. The carefully constructed persona of the noble countess had been stripped away, leaving only the avaricious, panicked schemer beneath. She looked frantically toward the prince regent, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. There were no more lies to tell, and the prince regent had seen enough. He rose to his feet, his face a mask of cold fury. He was not just a ruler. He was the ultimate guardian of the aristocratic order, an order Vivian had made a mockery of through her greed and deceit. "Countess Vivian," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have been given every opportunity to refute these claims. You have answered with theatrical displays and baseless slander. You have wasted my time, you have insulted the dignity of this court, and you have attempted to defraud the crown and the very laws of succession that hold this kingdom together." He looked to Lord Chancellor Aldrich, who gave a single grim nod. The evidence was absolute. "Your deception ends now." The Prince Regent extended his hand, and an aide placed a rolled parchment and a stick of crimson wax upon it. It was an arrest warrant. With a deliberate final motion, the Prince Regent pulled the signet ring from his finger, the symbol of his ultimate authority, and pressed it firmly into the warm wax. The seal of the crown was set. It was done. Two members of the royal guard stepped forward, their armor gleaming in the candlelight. As they took their positions on either side of Vivian, her face finally crumbled. The defiance, the arrogance, the desperate hope, it all dissolved, replaced by the blank, hollow shock of pure recognition. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw the terrifying understanding of a chess player who, after a long and complicated game, finally realizes they were checkmated from the very first move. She had been so focused on stealing a title, she never realized she was losing her freedom, her reputation, and her entire world. The guards took her by the arms. She didn't struggle. All the fight had gone out of her, leaving a limp, defeated shell. As they escorted her from the great hall, a disbelieving silence hung in the air, soon broken by a rising tide of whispers and astonished conversation. Lord Aldrich began gathering the documents, his expression one of grim satisfaction. But I was looking past him, past the gawking nobles, to the great tapestries on the wall depicting the history of the realm. Tonight's victory was more than just the end of Vivian. It was a beginning. I had reclaimed my name and my inheritance. But the fight had ignited a new fire within me, an ambition that went beyond simple restoration. The title of Countess was what Vivian had stolen, a title she had acquired through a dubious marriage. But the true ancient title of our house, the one held by my grandfather before a political slight saw it reduced, was higher still. Tonight's victory plants the seed for reclaiming our family's true title, Duke of Ravenscroft. The thought settled in my mind, not as a dream, but as a plan. They held her in the black cells, the deepest dungeon beneath the royal palace, reserved for traitors and fallen nobles. I was granted one visit before her sentence was formally carried out. Life imprisonment in that very cell. The Prince Regent had been merciful. The gallows had been the expected punishment for her crimes against the crown. But perhaps he, like me, understood that watching the world you tried to steal flourish without you was a punishment far crueler than a quick death. She was huddled on a thin straw pallet in the corner of her cell when I arrived, the fine silk of her court gown now stained and torn. The torchlight from the corridor cast long, dancing shadows, making the cell seem to shrink and crawl around her. She looked up as I approached the bars, her eyes hollowed out, the fire within them finally extinguished, leaving only the cold, gray ash of defeat. "You," she rasped, her voice a dry, broken thing. "Have you come to gloat, to watch me suffer?" "No," I said, my own voice even and calm. I felt no pity. I felt no lingering hatred. I felt only the quiet, cold finality of a chapter closing. "I came to thank you." A flicker of confused anger crossed her face. "Thank me? For what? For this?" She gestured wildly at the damp stone walls, the rusty shackles bolted to the floor. I gave her a small, serene smile, the same one I had worn when I first confronted her by the fireplace, an eternity ago. "You taught me a valuable lesson, stepmother. You taught me that power taken by force is brittle, that lies have shallow roots, and that a legacy built on ash will always be swept away by the first wind." I paused, letting the words settle in the grim silence. The title was never yours to keep, Stepmother, but thank you for making it so easy to destroy you. I saw the last flicker of understanding and horror in her eyes. She hadn't just been outmaneuvered. She had been the architect of her own demise. Her greed had provided me with the motive, her forgeries had given me the evidence, and her arrogance had delivered the final, fatal blow. I turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving her to the company of her ghosts and the endless twilight of her cell. 6 months later, I stand in Father's restored study. The room is filled not with the acrid smoke of betrayal, but with the warm, honeyed light of a new summer. The scent of old books and fresh ink is the same, but it is no longer a fragrance of memory and loss. It is the smell of progress, of a future being written. The ledgers on the desk are balanced, the coffers are refilling, and the lands are healing. The Ravenscroft Duchy flourishes under proper leadership. I dip my quill into a pot of ink and sign the last of 3 new trade treaties with the Southern Shires, agreements that will bring unprecedented prosperity to our tenants, treaties he would have been proud to witness. From this very room, Vivian had bled our home dry. Today, I am making it stronger than it has ever been. From her cell in the capital, they say Vivian has a clear view of the courtyard. She can see the sky, feel the sun on her face for a few minutes a day, and watch the world move on. Her cell window also overlooks the gallows she nearly sent me to, a permanent wooden fixture in the yard, a constant, silent reminder of the fate she had so meticulously planned for me and so narrowly avoided herself. Marcus enters the study, bowing as he places a fresh stack of correspondence on the corner of the desk. He is my most trusted advisor now, the sharp eyes and ears of my administration. "The petitions are growing, my lady," he says, a note of wonder in his voice. "Word of your victory over the Countess has spread throughout the peerage." He gestures to 3 letters, each sealed with the crest of a prominent noble house. Baroness Crewe, the young Earl of Northwood, and the House of Solaire, they all tell a similar story. A suspicious will, a predatory relative, documents that feel wrong. They seek your counsel. They want your help in exposing similar inheritance frauds. I look at the seals, a familiar fire stirring within me. Vivian was not an anomaly. She was simply a symptom of a rot that ran deep within the realm's noble houses. My fight, it seems, is far from over. It is only just beginning. Yes, sir. I pick up the first letter, feeling the weight of the parchment, the hope and desperation sealed within it. My rebirth on the executioner's block had felt like a singular miracle, a private chance to reclaim a stolen life. I see now that it was something more. It was the forging of a key, the sharpening of a tool that could unlock the cages of others. Some rebirths are gifts. Others are weapons waiting to be sharpened.